The land remembers. The high desert held its breath that morning. No wind moved through the sage, no bird called from the rim rock above the valley. The sky stretched pale and endless, the kind of empty blue that makes a person feel small, or perhaps truthful. Dust lay thick on the trail that cut through the basin, and the sun, still low, cast long shadows from the scattered juniper trees that clung to life in the hard-pan soil. She had been riding since before dawn. The woman on the gray mare moved slowly, not from caution but from weariness that had settled into her bones and made a home there. She was not young, but not old. Somewhere in that middle country where the body still obeys, but the heart has learned to expect nothing. Her dress was dark, patched at the hem, and a wide-brimmed hat shaded her face. She carried no rifle across her lap, only a small bundle tied behind the saddle, and a canteen that hung nearly empty. The land here did not forgive. It took what it wanted and gave back only silence. She knew that. She had learned it the way most people learn scripture, through repetition and loss. The mare picked her way down the long slope toward a town that sat like a stain against the floor of the valley. From this distance, it looked temporary, as if a strong wind might erase it entirely. A single church steeple rose above the rooflines, and beyond that, a livery stable and what might have been a mercantile. Smoke drifted from a few chimneys, lazy and thin. She had not meant to stop here. She had been traveling west for weeks now, moving through territories she did not know, toward a place she could not name. Away was the only direction that mattered. Away from the burned cabin on the plains. Away from the grave she had dug with her own hands beside the creek where the cottonwoods grew. Away from the memory of a voice that no longer spoke, but the mare needed water, and so did she. The town came into focus as she descended. It was called Santidad, or so the sign at the edge of the road claimed. A strange name for a place that looked like it had been assembled from leavings and desperation. The buildings leaned slightly, as though weary. A few men stood outside the livery, talking in low voices. A woman swept the porch of a boarding house. Her movements automatic, her face turned down. She dismounted at the public trough near the square and let the mare drink. The water was cloudy but cold. She filled her canteen, then splashed her face and neck, feeling the grit of travel wash away in thin trails. The square itself was empty, except for a handful of chickens scratching in the dirt, and a dog that lay in the shade of a wagon, panting, and a cage. It sat in the center of the square, iron and rough wood, the kind of thing used to hold animals or criminals awaiting trial. She had seen such things before, in other towns, other territories. Usually, they were empty, a warning more than a function. But this one was not empty. A man sat inside. His back was against the bars, his knees drawn up, his head tipped forward so that his face was hidden beneath the brim of a battered hat. He did not move when she looked at him, did not lift his head or call out. He simply sat, as still as stone, as though he had decided that stillness was the only dignity left to him. She turned away. It was not her business. She had no business anymore, only the road and the need to keep moving. She led the mare toward the livery, intending to ask for feed and perhaps a place to sleep if the price was fair. But she could feel the weight of the cage behind her, the way you feel a storm building even when the sky is still clear. Something about the man's stillness pulled at her, a thread she did not want to follow but could not quite ignore. At the livery, an older man with a gray beard took the mare's reins and looked her over with the practiced eye of someone who knew horses better than people. He nodded approvingly. "She is sound," he said. His voice was quiet, accented. "You have come far." "Far enough," she said. He glanced past her, toward the square, then back. "You will want to stable her for the night, yes? There is a storm coming. You can feel it." She had not felt it, but she trusted him. Men who worked with animals often knew weather better than the sky did. "What is the price?" "2 bits, feed included." She paid him, then asked, "The man in the cage, what did he do?" The old man's expression did not change, but something in his eyes shifted. He turned and began to lead the mare into the stable. "That is a question for the sheriff," he said, "or for God. I do not know which has the answer." She did not press him. She walked back into the square, slow, her boots stirring small clouds of dust. The sun was higher now, and the heat pressed down like a hand. She stopped a few yards from the cage and studied the man inside. He was lean, his shirt torn at the shoulder, his hands rough and scarred. A dark bruise spread across one side of his face and dried. Blood crusted his lip. He did not look up. His breathing was slow and even, as though he had learned to ration even that. She did not know why she stayed. She only knew that something in his stillness reminded her of herself. The way a person looks when they have stopped expecting mercy. A group of men came out of the saloon across the square, laughing, their voices loud and careless. One of them saw her standing there and nudged his companion. They wandered over, grinning. "You looking to buy him, lady?" one of them called. "We might let him go cheap. He does not talk much, but he is strong enough if you need a hand." The others laughed. She did not. "What did he do?" she asked again, her voice flat. The man shrugged. "Depends who you ask. Some say he killed a man in a card game. Some say he is a horse thief. Some say he is a half-breed, and that is enough." She looked at the man in the cage. He still had not moved. "When is the trial?" "Trial?" The man laughed again. "Lady, there is no judge for another month, maybe 2. He will sit there till then, or till he dies, whichever comes first." The others murmured agreement, then lost interest and drifted away, back toward the saloon and the promise of more drink. She stood alone in the square, the sun beating down, the man in the cage still as a held breath. She did not know his name, did not know his crime, if there was one, but she knew what it felt like to be locked away. Even without bars, she walked to the trough, filled her canteen again, then brought it to the cage. She knelt in the dust and pushed it through the bars. "Drink," she said. For a long moment, he did not move. Then slowly, he lifted his head. His eyes were dark, watchful, and very tired. He looked at her as though trying to decide whether she was real. Then he reached for the canteen. The encounter. He drank slowly, as though his body had forgotten how. The water ran down his chin and onto his chest, dark patches spreading across the torn fabric of his shirt. When the canteen was empty, he lowered it and held it out through the bars. She took it without speaking and walked back to the trough to fill it again. The square had grown quieter. The men from the saloon had gone back inside, and the woman with the broom had disappeared into the boarding house. Only the chickens remained, indifferent, scratching at the earth. The dog had not moved from its place in the shade. She brought the canteen back and set it just inside the bars where he could reach it. This time she did not kneel. She stood and studied him in the harsh light. His face was weathered, marked by sun and wind and something harder than weather. A scar ran from his left eyebrow to his cheekbone, pale against darker skin. His hands, when he reached for the canteen again, were large and bore the calluses of a man who had worked with rope and wood and steel. He drank again, more carefully now, then set the canteen down beside him. "Thank you," he said. His voice was rough, underused, but the words were clear. She nodded once. "What is your name?" He hesitated, as though the question were a trap. Then he said, Daniel Fierro. "They say you killed a man. They say a lot of things. Did you?" He looked at her for a long moment. His eyes were steady, neither pleading nor defiant. "Yes." She waited, but he offered nothing more. No justification, no excuse, just that single word, flat and final. "Why?" "Because he was going to kill someone else." "Who?" "A boy, 14, maybe 15. The man was drunk and angry, and the boy had nothing to do with it. I stepped in. The man pulled a knife. I took it from him. He fell. His head struck the edge of the bar." Daniel's voice did not change as he spoke, as though he were recounting something that had happened to someone else. He did not get up. She considered this. The sun climbed higher, and sweat gathered at the back of her neck beneath her hat. The law does not see it that way? The law sees a dead man and another man standing over him. The boy ran. No one else spoke up. The dead man had friends. He gestured vaguely toward the saloon. "I have none." "And the sheriff?" "The sheriff is the dead man's brother." She understood then. This was not justice. It was patience. They were waiting for an excuse, or for the man to weaken enough that it would not matter. "How long have you been in there?" 5 days, maybe 6. I have lost count. 5 days without shelter from the sun. 5 days with whatever scraps they bothered to throw him, if any. She looked at him again and saw the way his lips were cracked and split, the way his eyes sat too deep in his face. "They will let you die." "I know. And you will just sit there." He smiled, a brief and bitter thing. I do not have many choices. She turned and walked away, back toward the boarding house. The woman who had been sweeping stood on the porch now, arms crossed, watching. She was younger than she had appeared from a distance, perhaps 4. With iron-gray hair pulled back tight and eyes that missed nothing. "You are wasting your kindness," the woman said as she approached. "Is it a waste to give water?" "It is if the well runs dry afterward." The woman's voice was not unkind, only practical. "That man is dead whether you help him or not. The sheriff will see to it. If you make yourself a nuisance, he will see to you as well. I am only passing through." "Then pass. Do not stop. Do not look back." The woman paused. Then added, more quietly, "I have seen this before. Good people think they can fix things. They cannot. Not here." She met the woman's gaze and saw no malice there, only wariness. The same wariness she had seen in the mirror for months now. "Where is the sheriff?" The woman sighed. "You are a fool. I have been called worse. He is at the jail, 2 buildings down, past the mercantile. If you go there, do not say I sent you." She walked down the street, past the mercantile where a clerk stood in the doorway, watching her with open curiosity, past a shuttered building that might once have been a doctor's office, to a low adobe structure with barred windows and a sagging porch. A tin star hung crooked beside the door. She knocked. No answer. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The sheriff sat behind a desk, his boots propped on the scarred wood, a bottle beside him and a glass in his hand. He was a thick man, broad in the chest and gut, with a red face and small eyes that narrowed when he saw her. "Help you?" he said, not moving his boots. "The man in the cage. When is his trial?" The sheriff took a drink, slow and deliberate. "When the circuit judge comes through. Month, maybe 2. He will be dead by then. That is his concern. He says he acted to protect a boy." The sheriff's expression did not change. "He says a lot of things. I say he killed my brother. I say he will answer for it." "To a judge or to you?" The sheriff set his glass down and swung his boots off the desk. He stood, and she saw that he was taller than she had thought, and that his hand rested near the pistol at his belt. "Lady, I do not know who you are, and I do not care. But if you are smart, you will climb back on that horse and ride out before dark. This does not concern you. I am only asking if the law will be followed. The law is what I say it is." She held his gaze for a moment longer, then turned and walked out. Her hands were shaking, though, whether from anger or fear, she could not say. She walked back to the square, back to the cage. Daniel Fierro sat as he had before, motionless, his head tipped forward. She knelt beside the bars again. "I spoke to the sheriff. He looked up. And? He will not let you go." "I know." "Then what will you do?" "Wait. What else is there?" She reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out a folded cloth. Inside were 2 biscuits, hard and plain, left over from her morning meal. She passed them through the bars. "Eat." He took them, his hands careful, as though they might crumble to dust. He ate slowly, chewing each bite with the focus of a man who understood that this might be the last kindness he received. When he was done, he said, "Why are you doing this?" She did not answer right away. She looked at the sky, at the church steeple, at the empty street. "Because no one did it for me," she said finally. Then she rose and walked away, leaving him alone in the iron cage beneath the climbing sun. The unspoken tact. She took a room at the boarding house. It was small and spare, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single window that looked out onto the alley behind the building. The woman who ran the place, the same one who had warned her on the porch, showed her up the stairs without comment. At the door she paused. "My name is Carmen," she said. "Supper is at 6. You pay in advance." She paid. Carmen took the coins and studied her face for a moment, as though trying to read something written there. "What is your name?" Carmen asked. "Abigail." "Abigail." Carmen repeated it slowly, testing the weight of it. "You are running from something." It was not a question. Abigail did not answer. She stepped into the room and closed the door, and Carmen's footsteps faded down the hall. She lay on the bed and stared at the ceiling. The room was hot, airless. She could hear voices from the street below, the occasional rattle of a wagon, the distant hammer of the blacksmith. Somewhere a child laughed, high and brief, then went silent. She thought about the man in the cage, Daniel Fierro. She did not owe him anything. She did not even know if his story was true. Men lied, especially when their lives hung in the balance. She had learned that long ago. But she had also learned to recognize the shape of truth, even when it was wrapped in silence. She rose and went to the window. From here she could see a sliver of the square. The cage sat in the same place, the man inside a dark shape against the iron. No one approached him. No one looked at him. He had become part of the landscape, something to step around, like a stone or a post. She thought of the grave by the creek, the way the earth had resisted the shovel, the way her hands had bled, the way she had spoken his name once, twice, then never again. At supper, she sat alone at a corner table. The dining room was small, just 4 tables, and only 2 others were occupied. A pair of miners ate in silence, their faces carved by labor and dust. An older man, thin and pale, sipped broth and read a folded newspaper. Carmen brought her a plate, beans, a piece of cornbread, a slice of salted pork. The food was plain but clean, and Abigail ate slowly, aware that she had not tasted much in recent days. Halfway through the meal, Carmen sat down across from her, uninvited. "You went to see the sheriff," she said quietly. Abigail nodded. "And? He will not help. I could have told you that." Carmen leaned back in her chair. His brother was a bastard. Everyone knew it. Drunk, mean, looking for a fight. Daniel Fierro did the world a favor. But blood is blood, and the sheriff does not care about favor. Then why does the town allow it? Because the town is afraid. The sheriff has men. They call themselves deputies, but they are no different than the bandits in the hills. You cross him, you disappear, or you end up in a cage. Abigail set down her fork. "And you, are you afraid?" Carmen's face was unreadable. "I am practical." Fear and practicality look the same from the outside. She stood and collected the empty plates from the other tables, then returned to the kitchen. Abigail finished her meal in silence, then climbed the stairs to her room. She did not sleep. The heat lingered, and the night pressed close. She lay in the dark and listened to the town settle. Boots on wood, a door slamming, a dog barking, then quiet. At some hour past midnight, she rose, dressed, and slipped down the stairs. The front door was unlocked. She stepped into the street. The square was empty, silvered by a thin moon. The cage stood in the center, a black shape against the dust. She walked toward it, her boots soft on the ground. Daniel Fierro sat awake. She saw the faint gleam of his eyes as she approached. "You should not be here," he said. "Neither should you." She knelt and reached through the bars. In her hand was a canteen, full, and a cloth bundle. Inside the cloth, more biscuits, a piece of cheese, an apple. He took them without speaking. She watched as he ate, his movements careful, rationing even in hunger. When he drank, she saw the way his hands shook slightly, the tremor of a body pushed too far. "Why did you come back?" he asked. "I do not know." It was the truth. She did not know. She only knew that leaving him there, alone in the dark, felt like abandoning some part of herself. He finished eating and handed the cloth back through the bars. She folded it and tucked it into her pocket. "They will see you," he said. "They will ask questions. Let them." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You are not from here." "No." "Where are you from?" "Nowhere anymore." He nodded as though he understood. Perhaps he did. "I had a ranch," he said quietly. "North of here, near the river. Small place, a few horses, some cattle. My wife and I built it together, adobe and cedar. It took us 2 years." Abigail waited. The night was so still she could hear the scrape of his breath. "She died 3 winters ago, fever. I buried her under the cottonwood by the creek. After that, the place felt too big. I sold it, started moving, thought I would find work, find a reason to stay somewhere." He paused. "I have not found it yet." "I am sorry," she said. "So am I." They sat in silence, the bars between them, the town sleeping around them. Somewhere far off, a coyote called, and another answered. "What was her name?" Abigail asked. "Elena." "That is a good name." "Yes." She rose to leave, but he spoke again. "What was his name?" She stopped. For a moment she did not answer. Then quietly, she said, "Thomas." He nodded. Nothing more needed to be said. She walked back to the boarding house, slipping inside as silently as she had left. In her room, she lay on the bed and closed her eyes. Sleep did not come, but something close to it did. A loosening, a breath held and finally released. The next day, she returned to the square at midday with water and food. She did not hide. She walked openly, and the men loitering outside the saloon watched her but did not speak. She knelt by the cage, passed the canteen through the bars, and waited while he drank. "Thank you," he said. She nodded. That evening, she came again, and the evening after that. By the fourth day, it had become a rhythm. She brought food twice a day, water whenever the heat grew unbearable. She did not ask permission. She did not explain herself. She simply came. Carmen watched from the porch of the boarding house, but said nothing. Riff watched from the door of the jail, his face dark, but he did not stop her. The town watched, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, the cage became something else. Not a punishment, not a spectacle, a test. And Abigail had decided which side she was on. On the fifth evening, as the sun dropped behind the hills and the air finally began to cool, she sat beside the cage and leaned her back against the bars. Daniel sat on the other side, close enough that she could feel the faint warmth of him through the iron. "You are going to get yourself killed," he said. "Maybe. I am not worth it. That is not for you to decide." He was quiet. Then he said, "As they come for me, you walk away. You hear me?" She did not answer. "Abigail." She turned her head slightly, just enough to catch his voice. "Promise me." She looked out at the square, at the dust turning gold in the last light, at the church steeple rising like a question against the sky. "No," she said, and she stayed, the echo of the past. On the seventh morning, Abigail woke to the sound of rain. It came sudden and hard, drumming against the roof and pouring from the eaves in silver sheets. She dressed quickly and went to the window. The street below had turned to mud, and the square was empty except for the cage, dark and slick with water. She grabbed her shawl and hurried downstairs. Carmen was in the kitchen, kneading dough, and looked up as Abigail passed. "You will catch your death," Carmen said. "He will catch his first." She stepped into the rain. It was cold, colder than she expected, and within moments, her dress was soaked through. She crossed the street, her boots sinking into the mud, and reached the cage. Daniel sat with his knees drawn up, his arms wrapped around them, shivering. His shirt clung to his skin, and his hair dripped water into his eyes. He looked up as she approached, and for the first time since she had met him, she saw something close to despair in his face. "You should not be out here," he said, his teeth chattering. "Neither should you." She looked around. The saloon was closed, the jail shuttered. No one moved in the street. The rain had driven everyone inside, and for a moment the town felt abandoned, as though they were the only two people left in the world. She returned to the boarding house, ignoring Carmen's protests, and took the blanket from her bed. She also grabbed a tin cup and a small flask of whiskey she had been saving. She wrapped them in oilcloth and carried them back through the rain. At the cage, she pushed the blanket through the bars. It was already damp, but it was better than nothing. Daniel took it and wrapped it around his shoulders, his hands clumsy with cold. She poured whiskey into the cup and handed it to him. He drank, coughed, then drank again. The color began to return to his face. "Thank you," he said. She nodded and sat down in the mud beside the cage, pulling her shawl tight around her shoulders. The rain pounded down, relentless, and she felt it soak into her bones. "Tell me about the ranch," she said. He looked at her, surprised. "Why?" "Because I need to think about something other than this rain." He was quiet for a moment, then began to speak. It was near the San Pedro River, where the cottonwoods grow thick. The house faced east, so we could see the sunrise. Elena insisted on that. She said a home should start each day with light. His voice softened as he spoke, and she could hear the shape of his loss in every word. "We had a garden. She grew tomatoes, squash, chilies. She had a way with growing things. I was better with animals. We had 3 horses, 2 cows, chickens, a dog named Sombra. What happened to them? I sold the horses and the cattle when I left. Gave the dog to a neighbor. The chickens, I do not know. I just walked away one morning and did not look back." "Why?" He was silent for a long time. The rain eased slightly, shifting from a roar to a steady patter. "Because every corner of that place had her in it," he said finally. "Her voice, her hands, the way she sang when she worked. I could not stay. It was like living in a grave." Abigail understood. She understood too well. "I had a farm," she said quietly, "in Kansas. My husband built it. He was careful, methodical. Everything in straight lines, everything measured. The house, the barn, the fence posts. He said a good farm was like a good life. It required order." Daniel listened without interrupting. "We had been married 6 years when the drought came. The crops failed. The well went dry. We had some savings, enough to buy seed for the next season, enough to last the winter if we were careful." She paused, staring at the mud between her boots. "But then the fire came. We do not know how it started. Maybe lightning, maybe a spark from the stove. It does not matter. By the time we woke, the barn was burning. Thomas ran out to save the animals. The roof collapsed." Her voice did not break. She had told this story to herself so many times that it had become smooth, worn down like a river stone. "I pulled him out, but he was already gone. I buried him the next day. There was no one to help, no neighbors close enough, just me and the shovel and the ground that did not want to give." Daniel's hand appeared through the bars, palm up, an offering. She stared at it for a moment, then reached out and placed her hand in his. His grip was warm, despite the rain, steady. "I am sorry," he said. "So am I." They sat like that, hands clasped through iron, while the rain continued to fall. After a time, she let go and stood. Her dress was heavy with water, and her legs were stiff from sitting in the cold. She gathered the cup and the flask and turned to leave. But Daniel spoke again. "Abigail." She looked back. "You are the first person in a long time who has treated me like I am still human." She did not know what to say to that. So she only nodded and walked back through the rain to the boarding house. Inside, Carmen was waiting with a towel and a disapproving look. "You are going to catch pneumonia," she said, draping the towel over Abigail's shoulders. "I have survived worse. That does not mean you should invite it." Carmen made her sit by the stove and brought her hot coffee. Abigail wrapped her hands around the cup and let the warmth seep into her fingers. The rain drummed against the roof, a steady rhythm that filled the silence. "He is not a bad man," Carmen said after a while. Abigail looked up. "Daniel Fierro. I have known him a few years. He used to come through town now and then, selling horses, buying supplies. Always polite, always paid his debts. When his wife died, it broke something in him. You could see it. But he was never cruel, never dangerous." "Then why does the town allow this?" Carmen sighed. "Because people are afraid, and fear makes cowards. The sheriff has power, and no one wants to be the next one in that cage. Except me. Except you." Carmen studied her. "Why?" Abigail took a sip of coffee. It burned her tongue, but she welcomed the pain. It was something real, something immediate. "Because I know what it is like to be left alone," she said. Carmen said nothing more. She simply nodded and turned back to her work. That night the rain stopped. The air smelled clean, scrubbed, and the sky cleared to reveal a field of stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. Abigail stood at her window and looked out at the square. The cage was a dark silhouette against the moonlight, and she could just make out the shape of Daniel inside, wrapped in the damp blanket. She thought about the ranch by the river, the house that faced the sunrise, the garden full of tomatoes and chilies. She thought about the woman named Elena, who had sung while she worked, and the man named Thomas, who had measured everything in straight lines. She thought about the way grief could turn a home into a tomb, and how some people spent their whole lives trying to walk away from the graves they carried inside them. And she thought about the hand that had reached through the bars, steady and warm, offering something she had not felt in a very long time. Not pity, not charity, just recognition. One broken thing seeing another and saying, "I know. I understand. You are not alone." She pulled the shawl tighter around her shoulders and watched the stars wheel slowly overhead, ancient and indifferent, while below them the town of Santidad slept and dreamed its small and fearful dreams. The test of fire. The trouble came on the 9th day, just after sunset. when the light had turned the color of rust, and the shadows stretched long across the square. Abigail was walking back from the mercantile, with a loaf of bread and a small tin of peaches, when she heard the voices. Loud, slurred, aggressive. A group of men had gathered outside the saloon, 6 or 7 of them, passing a bottle and laughing in that particular way men laugh when they are working up the courage to do something they know is wrong. She slowed her pace, but did not stop. She could see Daniel in the cage, his posture different now, alert. He had heard them too. One of the men, tall and thick-shouldered with a beard that covered half his face, broke away from the group and staggered toward the cage. He carried a stick, thick as a man's wrist, and he dragged it along the iron bars as he circled, creating a harsh metallic rattle. "You hear that, Fierro?" he called. "That is the sound of justice coming for you." The others laughed and moved closer, emboldened. Abigail quickened her step. But Carmen appeared on the porch of the boarding house and caught her arm. "Do not," Carmen said quietly. "Not now. There are too many of them. I cannot just watch. You can and you will, if you want to live through the night." But Abigail pulled free and walked toward the square, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. The bearded man saw her coming and grinned. "Well, look here. The angel of mercy, Yuka." To save your pet? Leave him alone," Abigail said. Her voice was steady, though her hands shook. "He has done nothing to you. He killed a man, that is something. In defense of a boy, that is not what the sheriff says." The man turned and spat into the dust. "The sheriff says he is a murderer, says he is going to hang when the judge comes. But we are thinking, why wait? Why waste good rope and good time on a trial when we already know what he is?" The others murmured agreement, moving closer, forming a loose half-circle around the cage. Daniel stood now, his hands gripping the bars. "She has nothing to do with this. Let her go." "Oh, she has everything to do with this," the bearded man said. "She is the one who has been keeping you alive, feeding you, giving you water, making people think maybe you are not so bad. But we know better." He swung the stick and struck the cage, hard. The clang echoed across the square. Daniel did not flinch. Abigail stepped forward, placing herself between the man and the cage. "If you want to hurt him, you will have to go through me first." The man laughed, but it was an uncertain sound. "You think we will not? I think you are a coward, all of you. You talk about justice, but what you want is blood. You want to feel powerful because you are afraid." The bearded man's face darkened. He raised the stick, and for a moment, she thought he would strike her. But then a voice cut through the tension, sharp and cold. "That is enough." The sheriff stepped out of the jail, his hand resting on the pistol at his belt. He walked slowly across the square, his boots crunching in the gravel, and the men fell back slightly, suddenly unsure. "Go home," the sheriff said. "All of you." The bearded man hesitated. "We were just having some fun." "I said go home." There was no mistaking the tone. The men exchanged glances, then drifted away, muttering, back toward the saloon. The bearded man was the last to leave, shooting a dark look at Abigail before disappearing into the shadows. The sheriff turned to her. His face was unreadable in the fading light. "You are making this harder than it needs to be," he said. "I am only trying to keep a man alive until he gets a fair trial. There will be a trial. Will there? Or will he die in that cage first, and you will call it an accident?" The sheriff's jaw tightened. "You do not know what you are talking about. I know that your brother was a drunk and a bully. I know that Daniel Fierro acted to save a boy's life. And I know that you would rather see him dead than admit your brother got what he deserved." For a moment she thought he would hit her. His hand twitched toward his gun, and she saw the fury in his eyes, barely restrained. But then he took a breath and stepped back. "You have 3 days," he said quietly. 3 days to get on your horse and leave this town. If you are still here after that, I will arrest you for obstruction. And then you will see the inside of that jail, and no one will bring you water or bread or any other damn thing." He turned and walked back to the jail, slamming the door behind him. Abigail stood alone in the square, her legs trembling. She turned to the cage. Daniel was watching her, his face pale. You should leave, he said. No. Abigail, listen to me. This is not your fight. Yes, it is. Why? Why are you doing this? She looked at him through the bars, at the scar on his face, at the exhaustion and resignation in his eyes. She thought about Thomas, about the grave by the creek, about the long months of walking away from everything she had known. She thought about the emptiness that had filled her chest like cold water, the feeling that she had disappeared, that she no longer existed except as a shadow moving through the world. And she realized that somewhere in the past 9 days, that emptiness had begun to shift. Not disappear, but change, become something else, something that felt almost like purpose. Because I am tired of walking away, she said. She knelt and passed the bread and the tin of peaches through the bars. He took them, but did not eat. He just looked at her. And in that look was a kind of understanding that did not need words. That night, she lay awake in her room, listening to the sounds of the town. Voices from the saloon, louder now, angrier. The creak of the boarding house settling. The distant howl of a coyote. She thought about the sheriff's ultimatum. 3 days. She could leave. She should leave. She had her horse, her small bundle of possessions. She could be gone by dawn. Riding west toward California or north toward Colorado. She could disappear again, become no one, go nowhere. But she thought about Daniel sitting alone in that cage, waiting for a trial that might never come, waiting for mercy from men who had none to give. And she thought about the hand reaching through the bars, the quiet voice saying thank you, the way he had listened when she spoke about Thomas, not with pity, but with recognition. She thought about what it meant to be seen, to be known, to matter. And she knew she could not leave. The next morning, she was up before dawn. She filled her canteen, gathered what food she had, and walked to the square. The cage sat in the pale blue light, and Daniel was already awake, watching her approach. She knelt and passed the food and water through the bars. "You are still here," he said. "I am still here. The sheriff will arrest you." "Let him try." He shook his head slowly, almost smiling. "You are a stubborn woman, Abigail. I has been called worse." She sat beside the cage as the sun rose, painting the hills gold and orange and red. The town began to wake around them, doors opening, voices calling, the slow grind of another day beginning. And in the square, beside the iron cage, a woman and a man who had both lost everything sat together in the morning light and refused to be alone. The quiet aftermath. The second night after the confrontation, the fever came. Abigail noticed it first in the way Daniel's voice had grown hoarse when she brought him water at midday. By evening, when she returned with bread and a piece of dried meat, his hands trembled as he took the food, and his eyes had a glassy, distant look. She knelt close to the bars. "You are burning up." "I am fine," he said, but the words came slow, unconvincing. She pressed the back of her hand against his forehead through the bars. His skin was hot, dry. The nights had grown cold after the rain, and he had spent more than a week exposed to wind and sun and damp, with no shelter, no respite. His body had finally begun to surrender. "I am getting the doctor," she said, standing. "There is no doctor. He left 2 months ago. Took his bag and his wife and went to Tucson. Then I will get medicine from the mercantile. They will not sell to you, not for me." She looked down at him, at the way he leaned against the bars just to stay upright, and felt something hard and resolute settle in her chest. "We will see about that." She walked to the mercantile as the last light drained from the sky. The clerk, a thin man with spectacles and nervous hands, was preparing to close. He looked up as she entered, and his expression shifted immediately to wariness. "We are closed," he said. "I need medicine. Willow bark, if you have it. Whiskey. Clean cloth for bandages. I cannot sell you those things." "Why not? My money is as good as anyone's." The clerk glanced toward the window, toward the jail across the street. "The sheriff said we are not to help you, not to sell you anything. A man is dying. That is not my concern." Abigail stepped closer, her voice low and cold. "If he dies because you refuse to sell me medicine, his death will be on your hands. You will have to live with that. Can you?" The clerk's face paled. He looked at her for a long moment, then at the shelves behind him. Finally, With shaking hands, he gathered a small bundle. Willow bark, a bottle of whiskey, a roll of clean cotton cloth. He set them on the counter. $2, he said quietly. She paid him and left without another word. Back at the square, she found Daniel slumped against the bars, barely conscious. She knelt and reached through, shaking his shoulder gently. Daniel, wake up. His eyes opened, unfocused. Abigail, I am here. I have medicine. You need to drink this. She uncorked the whiskey and held it to his lips. He drank, coughed, then drank again. She dampened a piece of cloth with water from her canteen and pressed it against his forehead, his neck, his wrists. His skin was so hot it seemed to burn through the fabric. You should not be here, he murmured. You should leave. Save yourself. Hush. She worked quietly, methodically, wiping the sweat from his face, making him drink water mixed with shavings of willow bark. The night deepened around them, and the square emptied. Even the saloon grew quiet. It was as though the town had turned its back, leaving them alone in the darkness. Hours passed. She did not leave. She sat beside the cage, her back against the iron, and listened to his breathing, rough and labored. At times he muttered in his sleep, words in Spanish and English, fragments of memory. Elena's name. A prayer, perhaps. Once he cried out, sharp and sudden, and she reached through the bars and took his hand. I am here, she said. You are not alone. His grip tightened, then relaxed. The muttering stopped. Toward dawn, the fever broke. She felt it in the way his breathing eased, the way his skin cooled under her touch. When the first pale light crept into the square, he opened his eyes and looked at her. This time, his gaze was clear. You stayed, he said. I told you I would. He closed his eyes again, and she thought he had fallen asleep. But then he spoke, his voice barely a whisper. When Elena died, I thought I would follow her. Not right away, but eventually. Stopped caring whether I lived or died. I took risks. Picked fights I should have walked away from. I think part of me wanted someone to finish it, so I would not have to. Abigail listened, her hand still resting against the bars near his. But then you came, he continued, and you did not ask me to be anything other than what I am. You did not try to save me or fix me. You just saw me. And that was enough to make me want to live again. She did not know what to say. The words sat in her throat. Too large and too fragile to release. So she simply nodded, and he seemed to understand. As the sun rose, Carmen appeared on the porch of the boarding house, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders. She watched Abigail for a moment, then descended the steps and crossed the street, carrying a small basket. She knelt beside Abigail and set the basket down. Inside were fresh biscuits, still warm, a jar of honey, and a clean blanket. You are a fool, Carmen said, but her voice was soft. Almost kind, I know. But you are a brave fool. Carmen glanced at Daniel, then back at Abigail. I brought extra. He will need his strength. Thank you. Carmen stood and looked around the square, at the jail, at the shuttered windows of the saloon. The town is watching. Some are angry, but some are starting to wonder if maybe the sheriff is wrong. If maybe they have been wrong. Will it matter? I do not know, but it is a start. Carmen returned to the boarding house, and Abigail unpacked the basket. She handed a biscuit through the bars, then a second. Daniel ate slowly, and she saw the faint color returning to his face. You need to rest, she said. So do you. I will, soon. But she did not. She stayed beside the cage as the morning warmed and the town woke around them. People passed through the square, some averting their eyes, others staring openly. A woman leading 2 children stopped and whispered to them. And the children looked at Abigail with wide, curious eyes before being hurried along. A boy, no more than 15, thin and nervous, approached slowly. He stopped a few yards away, his hands stuffed in his pockets. Ma'am, he said. Abigail looked up. I just wanted to say thank you for helping him. The boy glanced at Daniel. He saved my life. That man, the one who died, he was going to kill me. Mr. Fierro stepped in. No one else did. Just him. Daniel lifted his head. You do not need to thank me. Yes, I do. The boy's voice trembled. I was too scared to say anything before. The sheriff, he told me to keep quiet. Said if I talked, I would end up in trouble too. But I am tired of being quiet. What is your name? Abigail asked. Billy. Billy Torres. Will you testify, Billy, when the judge comes? The boy hesitated, fear and resolve warring in his face. Then he nodded. Yes, ma'am, I will. He turned and walked away quickly, disappearing into the alleys behind the mercantile. Daniel leaned his head back against the bars and closed his eyes. That boy is going to get himself hurt. Maybe, or maybe he is going to do the right thing. The right thing does not always keep you safe. No, Abigail agreed, but it keeps you human. She stayed through the afternoon, through the heat and the flies and the stares of passers-by. She brought water, changed the damp cloth on his forehead, made him eat and drink even when he protested, and as the sun set and the sky turned violet and gold, she sat beside the cage and felt something shift inside her. Something that had been frozen for a very long time, beginning, finally, to thaw. The choice to stay or leave. On the morning of the 12th day, a rider came into town. He arrived just after sunrise, a lean man on a bay horse, wearing a black coat and a flat-brimmed hat. A silver badge gleamed on his chest. He rode slowly through the square, his gaze sweeping across the buildings, the cage, and Abigail sitting beside it. He dismounted at the jail and went inside. Carmen appeared at Abigail's side within minutes, slightly breathless. That is Judge Carver, she said. He comes through every few months. He must have gotten word. From who? Does it matter? Carmen smiled faintly. Someone finally did the right thing. Abigail stood, brushing the dust from her skirt. Daniel was awake, watching the jail door with an expression she could not quite read. Not hope exactly, but something close to it. The judge emerged an hour later with the sheriff at his side. The sheriff's face was tight, his jaw clenched. They walked across the square toward the cage, and a small crowd began to gather, drawn by the promise of spectacle or resolution. The judge was older than Abigail had first thought, perhaps 60, with gray hair and deep lines around his eyes. But his gaze was sharp, assessing. He stopped in front of the cage and looked at Daniel for a long moment. Daniel Fierro? He said. Yes, sir. I am Judge Carver. I have heard some troubling things about your situation here. He glanced at the sheriff, and about the circumstances surrounding why. Our arrest, the sheriff spoke quickly. He killed my brother, Your Honor. Stabbed him in a bar fight. There were witnesses. Were there? The judge's tone was mild, but there was steel beneath it. I would like to hear from them. The sheriff hesitated. Most have left town. Work, family business. How convenient. The judge turned to the crowd. Is there anyone here who witnessed the events in question? Silence. People shifted, looked at the ground, at each other. Then, slowly, a figure stepped forward. Billy Torres. The boy's face was pale but determined. I was there, Billy said. The sheriff's expression darkened. Boy, you do not know what you are doing. I know exactly what I am doing. Billy's voice shook, but he did not back down. Your brother was drunk. He came at me with a knife because I bumped into him by accident. He was going to kill me. Mr. Fierro stopped him. He did not pull a weapon first. He tried to talk him down, but your brother would not listen. They fought, and your brother fell. It was an accident. Mr. Fierro was trying to save my life. The judge listened without interruption. When Billy finished, the judge nodded slowly. Thank you, son. That took courage. He turned to the sheriff. Do you have any evidence to contradict this testimony? The sheriff's hands curled into fists at his sides. The boy is lying. He's been bought, or scared, or both. Has he? The judge looked at Billy. Did anyone pay you to say this? Threaten you? No, sir. I am telling the truth. I swear it. The judge studied the sheriff for a long moment, then turned to Daniel. Mr. Fierro, based on the testimony I have heard, I am ordering your immediate release. The charges against you are dismissed. A murmur ran through the crowd. The sheriff stepped forward, his face red. You cannot do this. He killed my brother. Your brother attacked a boy with a knife, and Mr. Fierro intervened. That is not murder. That is defense of another. If you do not like my ruling, you can appeal to the territorial court. But until then, this man walks free. The judge produced a key from his pocket and unlocked the cage. The door swung open with a rusty creak. Daniel sat for a moment, as though he did not quite believe it, then slowly stood. His legs nearly gave out, and Abigail stepped forward, catching his arm. Easy, she said. He leaned on her, and together they walked away from the cage. The crowd parted to let them through. Some faces curious, others resentful. The sheriff stood rigid, his eyes burning with fury, but he did not move. Carmen was waiting on the porch of the boarding house. She held the door open as Abigail helped Daniel inside and up the stairs to her room. He collapsed onto the bed, his breathing ragged. "Rest," Abigail said. "I will bring water and food." "Wait," he caught her hand. "Thank you. For everything." She looked down at their joined hands, his rough and scarred, hers small and pale. "You do not need to thank me." "Yes, I do." She nodded and went downstairs. Carmen was in the kitchen, and she filled a tray with bread, cheese, a bowl of soup, and a pitcher of water without being asked. "He can stay here as long as he needs," Carmen said. "No charge." "Why are you doing this?" Carmen paused, then said, "Because you reminded me that some things are worth the risk." "I had forgotten that." Abigail carried the tray upstairs. Daniel was asleep, his face slack with exhaustion. She set the tray on the small table and sat in the chair by the window, watching him breathe. Outside, the square was empty now, the cage standing open and abandoned like a shed skin. He slept for nearly a full day. When he finally woke, the light was golden and soft, the shadows long. He sat up slowly, wincing, and saw her still sitting by the window. "You stayed," he said. "I seemed to do that." He smiled, a real smile this time, and it changed his whole face. "I do not even know where to go now. I sold the ranch. I have no home." Abigail was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I have been thinking. I have some money left. Not much, but enough. There is land west of here, near the foothills. Good water, I have heard. Room for a garden, a few animals." He looked at her, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Abigail, I am not asking you to marry me," she said quickly. "I am not asking for anything except company. A partner. Someone to help build something that lasts. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you are decent. I know you tried to save a boy's life. I know you loved your wife and you have carried that loss with honor. That is more than most people can say." He stood and crossed to the window, standing beside her. Below, the town was settling into evening, lanterns being lit, smoke rising from chimneys. "I do not know if I can be what you need," he said. "I do not need you to be anything except yourself." He turned to face her. "Why me? Why this?" She thought about the grave by the creek, the long months of emptiness. The nights when she had lain awake and wondered if she would ever feel anything again. And she thought about the moment she had knelt beside the cage and offered water to a stranger, the moment everything had begun to change. "Because I am tired of being alone," she said, "and I think you are too." He nodded slowly. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, turning it over in his fingers. A ring, simple, worn silver. "This was Elena's," he said. "I have been carrying it since she died. I could not let it go, but I could not wear it either." It felt like both would be a betrayal. He held it out to her. "I want you to have it, not as a promise of marriage, but as a promise of partnership, of building something together, of not being alone." Abigail took the ring and studied it. The silver was scratched and dented, marked by years of work and love. She slipped it onto her finger. It fit. "Thank you," she said. They stood together at the window as the sun set and the stars began to appear, scattered across the darkening sky like seeds waiting to take root. The next morning, they went to the livery together. The old man with the gray beard greeted them with a nod and brought out Abigail's mare and a second horse, a sturdy roan. "This one needs a rider," the old man said. "He has been idle too long. Take him." "I have no money for a horse," Daniel said. "I did not ask for money. Just take him and treat him well." Daniel nodded, too moved to speak. They rode out of Santidad as the sun climbed over the hills, casting long shadows across the desert floor. Behind them, the town grew smaller, less significant. Ahead, the land stretched open and endless, full of possibility. Abigail turned in her saddle and looked back one last time. She saw the square, the empty cage, the church steeple rising against the sky, and she saw Carmen standing on the porch of the boarding house, one hand raised in farewell. Then she turned forward and rode on, Daniel beside her, toward the foothills and the promise of water and land and a home built not on the past, but on the choice to begin again. The echo and the legend. Years later, travelers passing through the foothills would sometimes stop at a small ranch, tucked into the crease where the desert met the rising slopes. The house was simple, built of adobe and weathered wood, with a porch that faced east toward the sunrise. Behind it stood a barn, a chicken coop, a corral where horses grazed in the long grass that grew thick near the creek. Smoke always seemed to rise from the chimney, even in summer, as though the hearth was never allowed to go cold. And if the travelers were lucky, or perhaps simply kind in their asking, they might be offered water from the well, shade on the porch, and a story. The woman who lived here was older now, her hair more silver than brown, her hands marked by years of work. But her eyes were clear, and when she smiled, which she did often, it was with the quiet contentment of someone who had found what they were looking for, even if they had not known they were searching. The man was tall and lean, his face lined by sun and age, a scar running from eyebrow to cheek like a map of some old journey. He spoke little, but his presence was steady, solid. He moved through the chores of the day with the practiced ease of someone who had made peace with his life. They were not married, the travelers learned, at least not in the way the law recognized. But they wore matching silver rings, simple and worn, and the way they moved around each other spoke of a bond deeper than paper or ceremony. A language built from years of shared silence, shared labor, shared grief transformed into something resembling grace. Some said they had come from the east, fleeing something. Others said they had met in a town called Santidad, a place most people tried to forget. The stories varied, grew, shifted in the telling. But certain details remained constant. A cage in a square, a woman who would not look away, a man who had been left to die and was given water instead. A choice made not once, but every day, in small gestures and quiet fidelity, to see each other, to stay. The ranch prospered in its modest way. They raised horses, sold them to ranchers and the army. They kept a garden that produced more than they needed, and the surplus was given to neighbors or travelers. They were known for their generosity, their fairness, their refusal to turn anyone away who came honestly asking for help. Once, a young woman arrived on foot, carrying a child and running from a husband who had raised his fists one time too many. She stayed for 3 months in the small room they kept for such purposes, learning to bake bread and mend harnesses, learning that there were places in the world where fear did not have to be the foundation of every day. When she left, it was with a horse, supplies, and an address of a cousin 2 territories west who would take her in. She wrote them once, years later, to say she had remarried, that she was happy, that she named her daughter Abigail. Another time, a boy no older than 15 showed up at their gate, dirty and desperate, saying he had killed a man in self-defense and the law was after him. They fed him, listened to his story, then rode with him back to the town he had fled. They stood beside him when he faced the sheriff, and they made sure he had a lawyer, a fair hearing, a chance. The boy was acquitted. He never forgot. People began to say that the ranch was a place where justice lived, the kind that did not depend on badges or courtrooms, but on the simple insistence that every person deserved to be seen, to be heard, to be given the mercy they themselves would want if the world turned hard against them. But Abigail and Daniel did not think of themselves as remarkable. They rose each day with the sun, worked until their bodies ached, sat together on the porch in the evening and watched the stars emerge. They spoke of small things, the horses, the garden, the weather. They did not need to speak of the past. It was there, in the rings they wore, in the way his hands sometimes found hers without thought, in the names they whispered on the anniversaries of loss. Thomas, Elena. Not forgotten, just carried differently now. Woven into the fabric of a life that honored them by continuing. On clear nights, when the sky was vast and the air smelled of sage and juniper, they would sit in silence and listen to the land breathe around them. The creek murmuring over stone, the horses shifting in the corral, the distant call of an owl hunting in the darkness. And sometimes, if the wind was right, they heard an echo. Not of voices exactly, but of something older and more enduring. The memory of every person who had ever chosen mercy over cruelty, presence over abandonment. The slow, difficult work of love over the ease of indifference. When Abigail was 72, she grew ill. It came quietly, a weakness in her limbs, a shortness of breath that worsened with each passing week. Daniel cared for her as she had once cared for him, bringing water, preparing food she could no longer eat, sitting beside her bed and reading aloud from the few books they owned. One evening, as the light faded and the room filled with shadows, she reached for his hand. "I am not afraid," she said. "I know. Will you be all right?" He smiled, though his eyes were wet. I will manage. You taught me how. You taught yourself. I only reminded you. She closed her eyes and her breathing grew slow and even. He sat beside her through the night, holding her hand, and when the sun rose and the light spilled through the window, she was gone. He buried her on the hill above the house, beneath a cottonwood tree they had planted together years before. He carved her name into a simple wooden marker, and below it a single line. She did not look away. He lived another 3 years, tending the ranch, keeping the hearth lit, offering water to travelers. When his time came, it was swift and without struggle. He simply lay down one evening and did not wake. The neighbors found him 2 days later and buried him beside Abigail, beneath the cottonwood that had grown tall and strong, its branches reaching toward the sky. The ranch passed to a young couple who had worked for them in their final years. They kept the name Abigail and Daniel had given it, Refugio, refuge. And they kept the tradition of offering shelter to those who needed it, water to the thirsty, a chance to those who had been denied one. And in time, the story became legend. The woman and the man who had built a life from brokenness, who had met in a square where one was caged and the other was free. And who had chosen each other, not because it was easy, but because it was right. Travelers still stop there, even now. They water their horses at the creek, rest in the shade of the cottonwood, and ask about the 2 graves on the hill. And the people who live there tell the story, the way it has been told for generations, changing slightly with each voice, but always returning to the same essential truth. That mercy is not weakness, that presence is not passive, that the choice to see another person, to stay when it would be easier to leave, to offer water when the world offers only stones, is the most powerful act of rebellion against despair that any of us can make. And that love, in the end, is not a feeling but a practice, a dailiness, a returning, again and again, to the simple sacred work of tending to one another in a world that would prefer we did not. The desert remembers. The hills remember. The wind carries their names still, whispered in the sage and the dust and the long light of evening. Abigail and Daniel, 2 souls who were lost and then found, not by fate or fortune, but by the quiet, stubborn insistence that no one should have to die alone in a cage, and that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is kneel in the dust and offer a stranger a drink of water, and begin again.